making headlines for not necessarily stuff on the field. Baker Mayfield has had a rough week, that's for sure. Skipped out on media availability after the Lions game, called out the fans the next day, said he only cares about winning the following day after that. I wonder how much longer Baker Mayfield's going to realistically have, because if you asked me a couple weeks ago, based off just purely his play, I would say there's still a 75% chance he's back in Cleveland over the next 3 years. Fine, because obviously you want him a playoff game. But when you start adding, calling out the fan base, the fans that support you may start to turn on you. And the fans that already hate you are just going to double down in that belief. I don't think that's a place that Baker Mayfield wants to put himself in when he is more or less in that 10 to 20 range at quarterback. If he was a top 5 quarterback, you could get away with shit like that. But calling out the fans when you're in his position, I think is a big mistake on his part. And I think the Browns are at the point where they're asking themselves, should it be in our best interest to start Case Keenum? Because at bare minimum, regardless of what Baker's actual numbers are, he doesn't look like he's playing well. Against that Lions, they were inconsistent. They couldn't convert. Their wide receivers aren't getting involved enough in the offense. You're starting to hear stories too about players and coaches getting into aggressive locker room conversations and meetings. It seems like a mess out there in Cleveland, which is not too unsurprising because this franchise has had a lot of messes over the years. Things are working in their favor. They could get JOK back this week. JOK, when he was first drafted, was supposed to be that Lamar Jackson stopper. So hopefully they have him for Lamar Jackson. And if you're talking about the Ravens, they're questioning if they're going to have Lamar Jackson ready to play on Sunday. He had a non-COVID illness this past week that prevented him from playing against the Bears. I'm going to assume that he's playing for the time being because we don't see too many players typically miss 2 games for non-COVID reasons. Some things to also talk about that could make or break this game. The Ravens, the 4th lowest completion percentage against in the National Football League. So they don't allow a lot of completions. The biggest problem is when the ball is in the receiver's hands and allowing them to break away. Now, the thing about that is the Browns don't really have anyone that can challenge them deep. The Browns don't really have anyone that's breaking free. Baker Mayfield isn't even attempting those throws. So I think this is a bad matchup all around for them. I'm going with the Ravens.
I will hit it right off the bat here and say Baltimore if Lamar Jackson plays, Cleveland if Lamar Jackson does not play. I'm just going to put that out there right now for the people listening. This in-game is entirely contingent upon Lamar Jackson for a result. The matchups are what they are. Both teams are going to run the ball a lot. This game's going to be over in like probably less than 3 hours because it's just going to be run the entire game. Kareem Hunt, by the way, is probably coming back for Cleveland this week. That's a nice little ad for them to soften the blow.
I want to say he was their leading pass catcher before he got hurt too.
That is correct. Yes. For the first 5 weeks of the season, he was their leading pass catcher. I believe that's now Njoku, if I remember correctly. I think Njoku is now the leading pass catcher for
and you wonder why Odell wanted out of town.
Yeah, it's not great right now. I think him and Gesicki are the funniest names that are leading their teams in receptions this year. Not great years for either of those teams. I'll ask you the Baker Mayfield question. If you could right now sign up for the next 2 seasons, Baker Mayfield at a total of $60 million, 2 years, $60 million for Baker Mayfield, would you do it?
I would probably want that to be closer to $40 million. I think when I think about like that level of contract, I think I want top 10 quarterback production, and I don't see him as a top 10 quarterback. I can legitimately list 10 quarterbacks I want over him, and that's not exactly the place you want to be heading into a contract negotiation. So I guess the simple answer is no on that contract. I want that to be a 2-year, $40 million deal.
So this is just kind of a ballpark figure for what the Browns options are here, because they've already opted into Baker's 5th-year option. So he'll be there next year for $21 million. They could then franchise tag him after that, which right now the franchise tag's around like 33.5 million, but that could change as more contracts go into effect. So that's kind of like the situation they're playing out right now. I agree with you that the Browns should probably sit down Baker Mayfield at some point, but for a different reason. It's because Baker Mayfield is currently dealing with a sprained MCL in his knee, a bruised foot, a torn labrum in his non-throwing shoulder, and a shoulder injury in his throwing shoulder at this point. So Baker Mayfield is absolutely physically destroyed at this point in the season. And it seems like he's kind of playing through it just to prove his worth to the Cleveland Browns a bit. But at this point, at this point in the season where we all feel very uncertain about Baker Mayfield, I don't think a 5-game sample is going to teach us anything new about Baker Mayfield that we don't already know, especially with a sprained MCL, bruised foot, torn labrum in his non-throwing shoulder, and right shoulder injury. I don't think we're going to learn anything new about Baker Mayfield at this point. So the argument would just be, is your team better with Baker Mayfield at quarterback than with Case Keenum at quarterback? The answer is yes. The question is it worth it to have Baker Mayfield destroy his body further in an effort to try and salvage this season? I don't know. There's no good answers to that question at this point. But I think if this were any other quarterback other than Baker Mayfield, he probably would have been ruled out for season at this point, because just the sheer mass of significant injuries in real structural damage places is probably wearing on Baker Mayfield a bit as well. Just from the fact also that, like you said, Baker Mayfield's like the 14th best quarterback in the NFL or the 15th best quarterback in the NFL. So add that into the mix of the equation as well. And it is not a desirable situation for the Cleveland Browns, but you can survive without Baker Mayfield, I feel like. So I would sit him down for injury purposes at this point in the season, because even this season is pretty much a wash for Cleveland. It's pretty disappointing how they've gotten here. They might get into the playoffs. They might be able to win a playoff game, but altogether, I think the difference between Baker Mayfield with injuries and Case Keenum at this point is not significant enough where Cleveland should start abandoning the blueprint and trying to push Baker Mayfield further just so they can get rid of him in a year or two.
Yeah. I mean, if you're negotiating that contract and I went into it and I told you the Browns offense had a 6-game stretch in which they didn't score more than 17 points. What type of quarterback do you think is playing? A backup quarterback or a first overall draft pick?
Yeah, it's somewhere right in there, but it's a tough break for him at this point, because I see that stat and I'm like, I know it's not all Baker Mayfield in that case. I know the Cleveland Browns have been going through injuries and they run the ball a lot, and they are obviously really, really bruised at this point, bruised and battered all the way around. And despite that, I'd still take the Ravens and this game entirely contingent upon Lamar Jackson's status. But man, it is a weird place to be in if you're Cleveland at this point, because Baker's going to be your quarterback for at least the next 2 years. So how do you play that out when he's in that like Kirk Cousins and Carson Wentz type of purgatory?
Well, that's where this offseason conversations come into play of all the veteran quarterbacks that are potentially available. Could Cleveland put their name in the ring for Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson? Those are some conversations that I'm sure are being told. Derek Carr, even. It's like Derek Carr, Baker Mayfield. You know what I'm curious? You know what I'm
one more I'd throw out there. What about the rotting corpse of Matt Ryan? Does the rotting corpse of Matt Ryan stand a chance anywhere?
See, maybe this is hard for me to gauge because I don't know if the team is bad or Matt Ryan is bad at this point. Because if I could get not 2016 Matt Ryan, but 2017 Matt Ryan and put him on the Browns with the talent that we perceive them to have, would he be good enough to win a playoff game? It's hard to say because he's not mobile. Too, Baker's not really mobile right now, particularly now that he's hurt. But he's at least more agile than Matt is at this point in his career, which I think plays a little bit better. I think Matt has also played in a dome his entire career. So assuming that he's going to play well in an outdoor environment is not something that I would just take lightly. I think it can affect different quarterbacks in different ways. So going from the NFC South to the AFC North would be quite the shift for him. I don't know if his arm talent is necessarily there to compete in that division. I mean, Ben Roethlisberger is barely able to compete in that division anymore.
Ben Roethlisberger's corpse is already rotted. That's not even a rotting corpse anymore. That one's just done at this point. But yeah, it's
still bank on upside with Baker there, I guess is the thing.
Yeah, it's not the worst situation to be. There are worse situations to be in than being with than having Baker Mayfield as your quarterback. It could always get worse.
Yeah. One thing that I was kind of disappointed in Lamar not playing is I wanted to see how the Ravens would adjust it after that Thursday night game against the Dolphins. One of the things that came from here that I kind of wanted to mention, you realize the Dolphins blitzed 35 times in that game with a DB.
Oh no, Baltimore.
That was one of the most insane things to go back and actually watch the highlights of that they literally spammed one move from Madden and it worked.
Yeah, because the Ravens offensive line is toast. I said this earlier in the year, and I haven't said it here yet because it hasn't really come up, but Ronnie Stanley has been the most impactful injury of the entire NFL season so far. Like, the Baltimore Ravens are screwed without Ronnie Stanley. And this is given that Lamar Jackson can rush out of the pocket and do things that literally no one else on the field can. He has no time back there to throw. Their offensive line was already in shambles to start the year. And you take away a potentially future Hall of Fame left tackle, like the Ravens are kind of screwed in not being able to protect Lamar Jackson even a little at this point. So that's simply why I say Lamar Jackson just by himself is good enough to win them 10, 11 games. And that might be good enough to win the division this year, but they can't compete with the other teams in the AFC just simply because they've had so many catastrophic injuries this year.
Oh, hey, there's the Browns pathway. Run the ball effectively now that you have Kareem Hunt back to add with Nick Chubb, and maybe add an extra blitzer because the Ravens offensive line can't hold up.